And a special welcome to our two new planning commissioners, uh, Commissioner Rothfeld and Commissioner Segura. With the council's appointment, we're now back up to full strength, and that's a good thing. There's a paragraph here I have to read on authority for holding a public meeting by Zoom. So here we go. In accordance with Executive Order N29-20 and guidance from the California Department of Public Health on gatherings, remote public participation is allowed. We will address the order in the following ways. Members of the public may not physically attend meetings. The Planning Commission meeting will be live streamed on the city's website, barring technical difficulties. Those members of the public wishing to participate must do so remotely via Zoom electronic meetings in the following ways. Either by logging onto the Zoom link located on the meeting agenda, please download the app to your computer or mobile device and enter the meeting ID, or by calling a listed number and enter the meeting ID. Public comment for the Planning Commission meetings will be accepted via email to publiccomment@cityofsthelena.org. All public comments must be emailed by 4 p.m. prior to the meeting. Emailed public comments will not be read out loud, but they will be publicly available and attached to the online Planning Commission agenda. I believe Ms. Kolzicki has a bit more detail on how to make those connections. Amalia?
I'll keep it brief just because we don't have any members of the public for this particular meeting, but if someone would like to participate publicly, they can press *9 or the raise hand button to be able to be put in the queue for public comment. And I think that's about it.
All right. Ms. Kolzicki, will you put up a flag, please? Thank you. And if the rest of us will mute, Commissioner Anderson, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to officially call this meeting to order and ask Ms. Camaro to take the roll, please.
Acting Chair Pont,
Here.
Commissioner Hale,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Rothfeld,
Here.
and Commissioner Segura.
Here.
Thank you. Well, we have no public forum because this is a special meeting. We have no consent items, no public hearings, no new business. We have one scheduled matter, Brown Act training. Maya, are you going to introduce Mr. De Los Angeles?
Yes, it's my pleasure. So, you know, BBK is our legal counsel for the city, and our city attorney, Ethan Walsh, has directed Mr. De Los Angeles to help us with our training. And I think this is really great timing now that we have a full planning commission again and 2 new commission members. So without further ado, I know we have a 6 o'clock meeting, so I will pass the baton to him to start his slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll share the screen. So can everyone see?
Yes, that's great.
All right, so good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Martin De Los Angeles, and I'm an attorney with Best & Krieger. Today's training will cover the Brown Act, which is California's open meeting law. I understand that we're limited in time today, so with that, we'll get right to it. So below this is a brief overview of the topics that we'll go through. These topics include the purpose of the Brown Act, meeting requirements, rules regarding public comment, and penalties and remedies. So the Brown Act is California's sunshine law for local government, and that's found in California Government Code beginning at section 54950. So the provision before you is pretty much the central provision of the Brown Act, and that kind of says, that all meetings must be open and public, except when the Act authorizes otherwise. So essentially, the Act's purpose is to promote transparency and to ensure that the public has the right to participate in public meetings. So what does the Brown Act apply to, or who does it apply to? The Brown Act applies to legislative bodies of local agencies. And so the term legislative body is defined to include the governing body of a local agency, which in this case would be your city council, and any commissions, committees, boards, or other body of the local agency, such as the Planning Commission. So the Brown Act also applies to other bodies such as standing committees, which can be made up of less than a quorum of the governing body, but have continued subject matter jurisdiction or a fixed meeting schedule. So this is typically, you'll see the city typically has committees on budget or finance and public safety. So the Brown Act would apply to those. But the Brown Act does not apply to temporary advisory committees or ad hoc committees, which are made up of less than a quorum of the legislative body and serve a limited purpose. So a typical example of this is a committee that's formed to interview candidates for a vacant position. And then also note that the Brown Act applies to persons elected to a legislative body even before they assume office. So what is a meeting under the Brown Act? The definition of meeting under the Brown Act is very broad and covers almost any gathering of a majority of members to hear or discuss any item of city business or potential city business. There are limited exceptions, which I'll get to later, but generally, conversations between commission members about any issues before the Planning Commission would be sufficient to constitute a meeting. It's important to note that no action needs to be taken for a meeting to occur. So a meeting can include any use of direct communication, intermediaries, or technological devices such as email. So commission members should always be aware of when and how they're discussing Planning Commission business outside of a meeting. So the Brown Act contains specific requirements for meeting agendas and notices. As members of the Planning Commission, you have meeting dates that are your regular meetings, and these meetings have a set time and place. For regular meetings, the Act requires that an agenda be posted at least 72 hours in advance of the meeting. And agendas must contain a brief general description of each item of business to be transacted or discussed at the meeting. As a general rule, no action or discussion may occur on items or subjects that are not listed on the posted agenda. Now, agenda posting requirements differ depending on the type of meeting to be conducted. For example, this is a special meeting, so these kinds of meetings, which are called as needed, the agenda must be posted at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. And there's other little requirements that are different from regular meetings. So one of them is that the member of the body must receive written notice of the meeting at least 24 hours in advance. And then members of the press and the public, they can also request written notice of the meeting. But again, many of the requirements also apply. So as with regular meetings, no action or discussion may occur on items that are not listed on the special meeting agenda. And so I'll just go over briefly this slide on closed sessions. So the Brown Act allows a legislative body during a meeting to meet privately with its advisors on specific topics. Examples of these topics that can be discussed in closed session include personnel evaluations, labor negotiations, pending litigation, and real estate negotiations. So a lot of this doesn't apply to the Planning Commission, but you should just note that when closed session items are called, they must be properly agendized, and there's certain language that needs to be used when you report them out in open session. And so teleconferencing, obviously, every meeting that we're having nowadays is through teleconferencing, but the Brown Act has certain requirements for teleconference meetings. Many of these requirements have been suspended by the governor as a result of COVID-19, such as the requirement that a majority of members participate in locations within the jurisdiction of the agency. Although some things are still required, and these include agendas, they're still going to be subject to the same notice requirements. And also votes must be done by roll call vote. And again, with respect to offsite meetings, since everything's offsite at the moment, some of these requirements have been suspended or modified by the governor's orders. So here's a brief summary of some of the modifications of the Brown Act in light of COVID-19. So you'll notice that some of this information, it's actually explained in each of the Planning Commission agendas that are posted. And so some modifications include meetings don't have to be physically accessible and can be made accessible by telephone or online. Remote locations don't need to be identified in the agenda, and the remote location doesn't need to be accessible to the public. A quorum does not need to be physically present within the agency's boundaries. Overall, though, the important thing to remember is that even though meetings are now remote, meetings still must be made accessible to the public, and this is going to be through Zoom, telephone, or other electronic means. So we'll now go through some situations where the Brown Act doesn't apply. The first is the individual contact exception, which is generally a conversation, whether that's in person or by telephone or by email, between a member and another person. However, as I'll later explain, such contacts can constitute what's called a serial meeting, and that's a violation of the Act if the individual also makes a series of individual contacts with other members of the body, serving as an intermediary among them. And the second exception is the seminar and conference exception. So attendance by a majority of members at a seminar or conference or similar educational function is generally exempt from Brown Act requirements. However, it's important to note that a majority of members still cannot discuss among themselves items of specific business relating to their own agency. And similarly, the third exception is the community meeting exception, where members can attend neighborhood meetings, town halls, or other community events. Again, though, these meetings, they still need to be open in public, and the majority of members cannot discuss agency business. And then the fourth exception allows the majority of members to attend meetings of other legislative bodies of the city, such as city council meetings, or of another jurisdiction. And then the fifth exception applies to purely social or ceremonial events. Again, the majority of members may not discuss matters of public business when they're in these events. So earlier I alluded to the term serial meetings. So the Brown Act prohibits a series of individual contacts if they result in a serial meeting. So a serial meeting essentially means a series of meetings or communications between individuals where ideas are exchanged among a majority of the body through either one or more persons acting as intermediaries or through telephone or email. So serial meetings typically occur in two ways. The first way up here is normally referred to as a daisy chain scenario. So in this circumstance, member A will contact member B contacts member C, and so on until a quorum has discussed, deliberated, or taken action on an item. And the second process, which is known as the hub and spoke process, typically involves a situation where member X, who acts as the hub, contacts members A, B, and C, and so on. And so these are like the spokes. And so basically, with that happening, a quorum has been contacted. And this can also occur if a staff member who acts as the hub communicates with a majority of members one by one for discussion, deliberation, for a decision on a proposed action. Again, these are all communications happening outside of a regular meeting or special meeting. So as mentioned earlier, as a general rule, the commission may not take action on any items that do not appear on the posted agenda. However, there's some like very limited exceptions where this can occur. And so these include a commissioner or staff making brief announcements at the meeting, making brief responses to public comments or questions from the public, asking clarifying questions to staff, or a commissioner wants to give direction to staff or report, ask staff to report back on an item or include an item at a future meeting. There's also an exception for urgency items. So you can, if something hasn't come to the attention of staff, after the agenda is posted, the body can, by a 2/3 vote, add something onto the agenda. So on to public comment. So every agenda must provide an opportunity for members of the public to address the body on items of interest to the public, either before or during the body's consideration of that item, or concerning items not on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. So for your planning commission meetings, public comments are generally structured by a general comment period, which I believe is 4 minutes, where the public can comment on non-agenda items that are within the commission's jurisdiction. And then there's a public hearing and consent items where the public can comment during the commission's consideration of that item. In addition, reasonable regulations can be placed for public comment, such as reducing speaking time in situations where there are large numbers of persons who wish to speak on a particular item. And there's also certain regulations that you can place on limiting disruptive comments. And so with public recording of meetings, again, this may not necessarily apply under the present circumstances since everything is online, but the public must be allowed to record meetings. Currently, as I mentioned, meetings are recorded and accessible online, but just important to note that once everything goes back to normal, sometimes people, they'll attend meetings and they'll record, and that's their right to do so. And finally, I'll just go over briefly some penalties and remedies under the Brown Act. So violations of the Brown Act can be fairly significant and include civil and criminal misdemeanor penalties, injunctions, and invalidation of decisions. Before filing any lawsuit to invalidate an action that's taken in violation of the Brown Act, the complaining party generally needs to make a written demand on the commission to cure or correct the alleged violation. The legislative body then has 30 days to cure or correct the challenged action, or to decide not to cure or correct the action. So again, these are situations that we want to avoid, and so the commission, prior to ever having to deal with this, just needs to make sure that there are no violations that the public or other persons can cite, and they can write a letter demanding a cure. And so the main takeaway from this is that a decision, such as if you guys approve a permit or other application, if that's done in violation of the Brown Act, that would essentially invalidate that decision. And there's just a lot of things that go on, that flow from that. So I understand there's a lot more issues that may require more discussion, but if you have any questions or concerns regarding anything we've covered, please feel free to contact the city attorney's office. So that concludes my presentation, and I just want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does any member of the commission have a question or two for Mr. De Los Angeles?
I do.
Really? Yeah. Oh, Daniel, sure. Mr. Commissioner Hale.
Just going back a few slides to the urgency items or the where you said something about if 2/3 vote, is that something up until the meeting and including during the meeting? If it's not on the agenda, you would have to speak on that issue, you'd have to have a 2/3 vote to agree to it? Or is there a time sensitive piece to that?
Well, typically the time sensitive piece is that it came to the attention after the agenda was posted. So basically, like if something was posted 72 hours ago, and then within the 72-hour time frame after the meeting, between that time, something is discovered that needs to be agendized, then that's sort of the time sensitivity there. But if there's like an email between staff that discusses an item, showing that it was, it was something that could have been brought to the attention prior to the posting, then you can't post that. But this is for things that just come up like after you post the meeting, post the notice, and then if something comes up and it needs to be agendized, then we can bring that up during the council, the commission meeting, and then a vote can be made.
But ideally, that happens before the meeting starts.
That would happen at the beginning of the meeting. Typically, like we would approve the agenda, and then we would take a vote on adding this potential item on.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Let me follow up on that if I could, please. Are there any standards as to what constitutes an urgency item?
I mean, the only standard is really that it just came to, there's immediate action. That's the standard, that if you don't act on it now, then you have to justify like why you have to add that on. And then the main one is that, and then the second standard is it came to the attention after the agenda was posted. So. Yeah.
Any more questions? Well, a question, if you would, on the Spoken Hub illegal meeting. Is there? Let's say the Spoke isn't a member of the Hub isn't a member of the commission, and the Hub doesn't communicate to the Spoke ends that they are indeed holding an illegal serial meeting. What's incumbent upon the commissioners and indeed the staff member in that kind of condition?
So typically, my understanding is when it's sort of like that hub and spoke, even if the hub, which is X here, isn't, it's typically when he's going to speak with, it's a one-on-one with a commissioner, and the commissioner sort of gives like direction. Anytime you give direction, then you're going to you're likely to communicate that direction to the other commissioners, even if you're not communicating directly with each of them. So basically, the hub is sort of a conduit for what each commissioner wants, and so essentially by doing that, you're kind of combining what the directions that each person wants, and that would constitute the quorum.
So who is responsible in that kind of condition? Is it the Hub or the Spokes?
Well, it's at the end of the day, it's the appointed official, so it's going to be the commissioner that's responsible. So as much as possible, when you're speaking with staff, it's important that that when you're considering an item that's outside of a meeting, it's not directional. You're kind of not asking, you're not telling them your position and kind of having them convey that indirectly, to another commissioner.
You could be at risk without even knowing it, then it's the answer.
That's the problem with the Brown Act. It's ambiguous and vague, and there's always a risk. So the important thing to remember is that basically you want to be considering items as a whole when you're together in a meeting. And if you're going to speak to staff, it's just going to be for clarifying things. It's not really going to be for, you don't want to give your positions and considerations outside.
Thank you. Any more questions of Mr. De Los Angeles? Hearing none. All right, thank you. Well, it's 5:30. That will give us half an hour. Well, I'm hoping we can defer the department reports and the agenda forecast to the main meeting, if that's agreeable with everybody.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Then that leads us to which used to be Lester's favorite part. This meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you in half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you.